White Fang was nearly 5 years old. By that time, he had grown to be a strong and angry dog. Both men and dogs were afraid of him. He had always been an outsider of the pack, and he had never made friends with other dogs. On the contrary, he had become a very efficient fighter and killer of other dogs. A single dog had no chance against him. He was too quick and too intelligent, and he employed this perfect mechanism of his body and brain to kill others. If he had spent more time with his mother, if he had been brought up among other puppies from the beginning, and if Grey Beaver had been a more loving master, White Fang could have turned out different. As it was, he had become a lonely, unloving, and ferocious enemy of other dogs. It was in the summer, when White Fang turned 5, that Grey Beaver took him on a great journey to the Yukon. They settled in Fort Yukon, where Grey Beaver wanted to sell furs and moccasins to the white men looking for gold there. And so it was in Fort Yukon that White Fang saw his first white people. As compared with the Indians he had known, they seemed to him a race of more powerful gods. But if the white gods were powerful, their dogs didn't match their master's strength. White Fang's conclusion was that they were mostly soft, made much noise, and were extremely easy to kill, and so killing them became a sport for White Fang. But White Fang was wise. He never made a show of killing white men's dogs. He had long learnt that the gods were made angry when their dogs were killed, and white men were no exception to this. So what White Fang did was to attack a dog and, before his victim could attract his master's attention with his cries, he would have his throat open with one perfectly calculated slash of fangs. Then White Fang would leave the crying unfortunate for the other dogs, and they finished the cruel job. Then, if the master of the murdered dog was around, he would take revenge on the other dogs, not on White Fang. Soon, White Fang became a true expert at it, and while Grey Beaver was selling furs to the white gods, White Fang made it his main occupation to kill their dogs. Most people, if they saw such a dog as White Fang was then, would avoid him as far as they could. But there was one white man in Fort Yukon who had been observing him for some time, and the more cleverly cruel White Fang appeared, the more the man admired him. His name was Beauty Smith. His name Beauty sounded ironic when you looked at him, as he was widely recognized as the ugliest Nan in Fort Yukon. Unfortunately, his character matched his looks. He loved hurting others and loved watching others being hurt. That is why watching White Fang as he killed other dogs gave him a lot of pleasure, and as he watched, the desire to possess this cruel dog started to grow in him. Yes, he would buy it. It didn't take him long to find out who White Fang belonged to, and soon Grey Beaver received a visit from Beauty Smith, who was offering him a large sum of money for the dog. But Grey Beaver didn't want to sell White Fang, and since he had grown quite rich with selling his furs and moccasins, he didn't need to sell his best dog. White Fang is not for sale. It's the best dog I've ever had. And what is more, he can fight. He can kill other dogs as easily as men kill mosquitoes. Beauty Smith's eyes lit up at this, and he licked his thin mouth with his yellow tongue. He really wanted to have this dog, and he would have him. He knew the ways of the Indians. From that day on, Beauty Smith visited Grey Beaver very often, and each time there would be a bottle of whiskey under his coat. Grey Beaver grew to like whiskey a lot. Soon he wanted more and more of it. The money he had received for his furs and moccasins he started to spend on the bottles Beauty Smith was bringing. In the end, all his money was gone. It was then that Beauty Smith talked to him again about the sale of White Fang. But this time the price he offered was in bottles of whiskey, not in dollars. And Grey Beaver's ears were more willing to hear it. When White Fang came back into the camp that evening, he saw that the white god wasn't there. He was pleased. He didn't like that god at all. From the moment he saw Beauty Smith, he felt he should avoid him at all costs. But it wasn't to be so. No sooner had White Fang laid down to rest than Grey Beaver put a thick rope around his neck. Then he sat down next to his dog with a bottle of whiskey and waited. An hour passed, and White Fang recognized the familiar footsteps. It was Beauty Smith coming to claim his dog. White Fang saw how Grey Beaver passed the rope into Beauty Smith's hands, and he understood that while he pushed him out of the camp, he wanted him to go with the White God. And although he didn't want to, he followed Beauty Smith into Fort Yukon and let himself be tied outside of his house. There he waited an hour, and then within 10 seconds cut with his teeth through the rope and was free. Soon he was back sleeping outside of Grey Beaver's teepee. But what had happened before was repeated, but with one difference. When Beauty Smith came to take White Fang with him, first he gave him a beating. White Fang did understand why. He had seen dogs changing owners before. He knew that Grey Beaver wanted him to stay with the White God. But he had given his body and soul to Grey Beaver, and he had made Grey Beaver his particular god. He was not going to give up his god so easily. So even though this time Beauty Smith tied him not with a rope but with a stick, he still managed to free himself and was outside Grey Beaver's teepee by the morning. The beating he received this time from Beauty Smith was the worst in his life. It would have killed a weaker dog, and by the end of it White Fang was sick. He could hardly move. Beauty Smith had to wait for an hour before he could start slowly pulling White Fang behind him in the direction of Fort Yukon. This time he tied the dog with a metal chain which was stronger than White Fang's teeth. Still, though sick and tired, all night he tried to crush the chain or pull at it. But nothing worked, and White Fang remained in Fort Yukon as the property of a madman, whom he knew he must accept as his master from now on.